I once believed the worst pain was being forgotten, until I saw a woman standing under bright lights cradling a fake pregnant belly. Not to seek pity, but to force a nation to stare at a truth it tried to bury. She had no child, she was never pregnant, but every step she took was an indictment no one dared to sign. Then, the state's most powerful politician showed up on the donor list of her foundation. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now to never miss the most gripping episodes we bring to you. Under the crisp morning light of the Colorado mountains, the estate perched atop a ridgeline looked like something pulled from a designer catalog. Stone columns wrap around porch, tall glass windows reflecting the pine-dappled sky. A white gravel driveway wound toward the main entrance like a ribbon leading to revelation. Today, that revelation was wrapped in pastel streamers, lavender lanterns swaying in the breeze, and a metallic balloon arch that spelled one word in gleaming gold: girl. Inside the estate, the great room had been transformed into a cathedral of curated femininity, rose gold accents cascading flower arrangements, champagne flutes rimmed with pink sugar, and a live string quartet performing soft classical renditions of pop songs. The scent of peonies and vanilla-scented candles floated through the air like a soft spell. Guests clustered in pockets of admiration, local influencers snapping selfies near the dessert bar, political donors shaking hands over flutes of Prosecco, wellness bloggers gushing over the vegan hors d'oeuvres shaped like baby rattles. At the center of it all stood Madison Quinn. Dressed in a flowing chiffon gown that hugged a rounded belly, she exuded radiance, the kind that didn't just catch the light but demanded it. Her long auburn hair curled in perfect, effortless waves, framing cheekbones, brushed with subtle gold shimmer. Every move she made had intention grace. Madison wasn't just hosting a gender reveal party, she was staging a masterpiece. Madison, a woman in stilettos, called raising her mimosa. You're glowing. Madison laughed, the sound measured yet warm, like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror 100 times. It must be the hormones, she replied, resting a hand gently on her belly, eyes twinkling. And just behind the crowd, entering without fanfare, but carrying an energy that seemed to cut through the orchestrated perfection, was Elise Morgan. She wore black, not because she was grieving anything in particular, but because it was clean direct. Her blazer was crisp tailored. Her notepad, tucked discreetly into her leather bag, was worn at the edges, marked with scrawled shorthand and coffee stains from 3 years' worth of stories that never made the news. Elise didn't smile as she approached. She didn't gasp at the decor or reach for the champagne. Her eyes swept the room, cataloging details, exit points, camera placements, the angles of interaction, the subtle choreography that ran beneath the surface of events like this. She saw the cameras first. Not the obvious ones held by the hired photographer, but the small motion-activated devices mounted subtly near the crown molding. She noticed the soft murmur of a woman on a headset near the entrance, giving cues to the string quartet. She saw that none of the desserts had been touched, and that the gift table was stacked disproportionately high for a woman who'd spent years championing modest living and sustainable values. She saw Madison, her best friend of 14 years, and paused. The belly was full, too full, rounder than it had been in photos from just last week. It didn't move as Madison laughed or shifted her weight. There was no discomfort in her posture, no heaviness in her feet. Elise watched closely as a well-meaning guest reached out to touch the belly. Madison leaned back instinctively, hand fluttering down to redirect mass deflect. The room erupted in applause as a large curtain dropped, revealing a wall of pink butterflies fluttering on strings behind a printed banner. Welcome, baby Quinn. Elise didn't clap. Instead, she walked calmly to the refreshment table, poured herself a glass of cucumber water, and turned slowly, letting the crowd move around her. Her journalist instinct hadn't brought her here just to celebrate. It had brought her to observe, to notice, to confirm. A man bumped into her, apologized, and moved on. She barely noticed. Her eyes had locked on something else, someone else. Near the edge of the property, beyond the open French doors leading to the veranda, a man in a charcoal coat stood beneath the pine trees, hands clasped, face downturned. He didn't look like a guest. Didn't look like he belonged to any PR firm or donor list. Elise studied his outline, the stillness of someone watching with purpose. She reached into her bag, pretended to retrieve lipstick, and snapped a discreet photo with her phone. Then she took a step back and watched Madison. She was circling through the crowd now like a seasoned politician, hugging guests, giving them just enough eye contact to make them feel special before moving on. She had the timing of a performer, the expression of a woman who knew exactly what each gesture would look like on Instagram. Elise, Madison called across the room. You made it. Elise offered a tight smile, walking toward her. Wouldn't miss it. They hugged briefly. Elise's arms stayed rigid, her cheek barely brushed Madison's. She didn't feel anything behind the fabric. Madison held her at arm's length, mock scolding. God, you're all bones. You need to eat something. The catering's by that chef I told you about, the one with the truffle salad. Elise's tone was light. Right, the one you said charges by the syllable. Madison laughed a little too loud and tugged Elise gently by the hand. Come meet the governor's wife. She's dying to talk to someone real. Elise let herself be pulled, but her mind remained elsewhere. This wasn't the Madison she'd known in college, the girl who cried over stray dogs and marched downtown with handmade signs. This Madison was curated, polished, untouchable. Elise had followed her rise for years, had cheered as Madison's nonprofit became a household name among philanthropic circles. New Grace Foundation, a charity devoted to supporting single mothers, had helped hundreds, maybe thousands. But now it felt like something was off. Not just about the pregnancy, about the stage. The music swelled as an MC stepped forward and announced the moment everyone had been waiting for, a countdown. Madison walked toward a velvet-covered podium. A giant balloon hovered above, filled with colored powder. Elise stepped back into the shadows of the entryway. She noticed a clipboard left on a side table, the event run sheet. Madison's name appeared 12 times in 30 minutes. Speeches, spotlights, no doctor on site, no mention of a due date. She made a note in her phone. When the balloon burst and a flourish of pink dust and applause shook the room, Elise didn't move. She looked instead at Madison's face, at the sharp inhale she took just before the pop, at the tremble she suppressed as people swarmed her. Elise didn't believe in intuition as something mystical. She believed in pattern recognition, in silences that weighed more than words. And right now, Madison's silence was screaming. In the corner of the room, the man in the charcoal coat had vanished. Elise drained her glass, slipped out through the back patio, and opened her phone. It was time to start asking questions. Not as a friend, but as a reporter. The air inside the estate shifted the moment the balloon burst. It wasn't the swirl of pink powder that caught Elise off guard. It was the flicker in Madison's eyes just before the pop, a split-second hesitation that didn't match the joyful anticipation around her. That moment stayed with Elise like an afterimage burned into her mind, even as the guests swarmed in with their congratulations, their curated smiles, their eager phones capturing what they thought was joy. But Elise wasn't looking at the spectacle anymore. She was looking for the seams. She moved through the crowd quiet and fluid, the way a seasoned reporter does when she's not yet sure what she's looking for, only that something's off. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she drifted toward the memory table stationed beneath a stained glass window. It had all the usual suspects: a framed ultrasound photo, tiny shoes, hand-knit baby socks, a guest book signed in glitter pen, and a shadow box that read, "Counting down the weeks until we meet you." The ultrasound image was what drew her in first. It was a grainy side profile of a fetus. She picked it up, gently studying it. No date, no patient name, just the vague, washed-out outline of a baby. No hospital logo, no doctor's signature. She glanced down at the accompanying paperwork beneath a velvet runner. There were pamphlets. 10 signs you're having a girl, natural birthing in the Rockies, and essential oils for motherhood. But there were no appointment cards, no OBGYN reference, no list of prenatal visits, not a single verifiable medical record. Not even a baby registry. For someone like Madison, organized to the marrow, meticulous in detail, branded in every gesture, it was impossible. A gaping omission. Elise's gut clenched, a cold whisper of doubt threading through her chest. She glanced around. The crowd had moved toward the cake display, a towering pastel creation of fondant bows and buttercream roses. Madison was flanked by donors and local businesswomen. Her laugh echoed across the room like crystal dropped into a fountain. But Elise didn't look at her. She was watching a man. He stood alone near the far window, arms crossed, posture sharp. He wasn't mingling, wasn't eating, wasn't celebrating. He wasn't dressed like anyone else, no blazer, no pastels, no softness. Just a charcoal wool coat, navy shirt, clean-shaven. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. His face unreadable, his eyes tracking Madison with a calm intensity that felt surgical. He didn't look curious. He looked like he was waiting. Elise reached into her bag without breaking stride, palming her phone and holding it low against her thigh. She turned, slightly lifted it just enough to snap 3 quick photos in burst mode. The shutter was silent. Years of practice. The man didn't move. Her heart pounded as she lowered the phone and took a casual step backward behind a column. She zoomed in on the images. Crisp, defined. The way he stared at Madison, there was no affection, no familial resemblance. Just a sharp focus, clinical. Watching, not admiring. She started a new note in her phone. Unknown male, mid-40s. Possible investigator not from Madison's known donor list. No interaction with guests. Watching Madison exclusively. She added the timestamp, then slipped the phone away and scanned the room again. A staff member passed with a tray of glasses. Elise grabbed one, sipped the cold water, and let her eyes trail across the walls. There were photos everywhere: Madison posing at press events, ribbon cuttings for maternal health centers, smiling beside mothers and children holding care boxes. But not a single candid. no photos of Madison at home, no images from doctor visits, no personal documentation. And again, the same issue, the pregnancy didn't exist outside this room. The thought settled in her stomach like stone. She turned back to the memory table, took out her notepad, small spiral bound, the kind she carried since her earliest reporting days, and scribbled quickly. No chart, no ultrasound date, no registry, no OB references, controlled narrative, all branding, no verification, public image, maternal graceful, but lacks physical strain. Discomfort avoided, distance maintained, belly never touched. She underlined the last one, twice. A nearby guest squealed with delight at the cake, reveal a sugary pink explosion of raspberry cream that sent shrieks and camera flashes bouncing around the room. Elise's eyes stayed on the man in the charcoal coat. He was gone. She scanned the perimeter. Nothing. No trace of him near the windows, no footprints on the wet patio stones beyond the sliding doors. A breath of wind curled through the room, catching a paper butterfly and sending it spiraling to the floor. Elise stepped back toward the crowd but didn't rejoin them. Instead, she veered left, slipping into the hallway leading to the private quarters. The event coordinator had stationed a velvet rope across the hall, but it was loosely draped, easily passed. Elise moved like she belonged there, confident, silent, her footsteps absorbed by thick carpets. She passed by a half-closed door and saw what looked like Madison's office bookshelves, a desk, a large corkboard pinned with timelines and donor contact sheets. There were brochures for New Grace Foundation spread across the glass top, but again, nothing personal, nothing private, no medical charts. No prenatal vitamins, no signs of an actual pregnancy, just more branding. She pulled out her phone and snapped 3 more shots, desk board calendar. She zoomed in a keynote speech scheduled for the following week. A flight booked to DC, a strategic luncheon with board members of a pharmaceutical company. She flipped the next page in her notepad. Where is the personal layer? Where is the maternal chaos? No meds, no prep, no clutter. This office belongs to an executive, not an expectant mother. She heard laughter echo from the hallway and quietly slipped out, returning to the main hall, just as Madison raised a glass for a toast. To the future, Madison said, smile, radiant eyes glassy with feigned tears. To strong women and the little girls who will change the world. The room applauded. Elise remained still. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. She wrote down one more line. This isn't a pregnancy, it's a performance. And the curtain she knew was just beginning to rise. Elise sat alone in her car, parked 3 blocks from the estate. The pink dust from Madison's balloon spectacles still clinging to her coat like the residue of something staged. She hadn't stayed for cake or toasts or the slow-motion final photo ops. Instead, she'd slipped out as the crowd circled Madison like orbiting moons, all smiles and congratulations. Now her fingers hovered over her keyboard, the glow of her laptop lighting her face in the dimness. Her coffee had gone cold untouched. The engine was off. Her windows fogged slightly in the mountain chill, but Elise didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the search bar, blinking on the screen. Madison Quinn, New Grace Foundation, past media coverage. The first few results were predictable glossy features in lifestyle magazines, interviews with headlines like, How Madison Quinn Became the Face of Compassion and Building Grace One Mother at a Time. Photos of her smiling in maternity clinics, cradling babies that weren't hers. Clips from daytime talk shows. A TEDx talk titled, Redefining Resilience. She scrolled past the curated content, past the SEO-optimized articles. She dug deeper. Page 6, page 7, obscure blog posts, dated PDF archives from local news. And then she found it. A tiny blip, barely 2 sentences in a community bulletin board from 7 years ago. Local volunteer Madison Quinn withdraws from Women's Health Initiative citing personal reasons. Will be taking extended leave from public engagement. There were no photos, no follow-up. For someone as public-facing as Madison, the sudden disappearance, especially during a time when her foundation was just gaining traction, stood out like a missing tooth in a perfect smile. Elise opened a new file on her laptop titled MQ Timeline, Inconsistencies. She typed quickly. 2016, sudden withdrawal. No public reason. 2017, reappears with renewed mission. Foundation shifts branding from education to emotional healing. Surge in corporate donations begins late 2017. Elise closed the browser and opened another tab. She searched Madison's name alongside terms like hospital stay, clinic, police report, ER record. Nothing concrete, no lawsuits, no obits, no scandals. And still, that gap. That void of narrative. She opened a private email account she kept for sensitive leads, one she used when she was chasing darker truths. She sent a single sentence to a confidential medical contact. Need confirmation on a possible hospital admission under alias or sealed name, Denver region, early 2016. Victim not perp, female, early 30s. She hit send. Before she could close the tab, her inbox pinged. An unknown address, no subject line. Just one sentence in the body. Don't let her fool you. This isn't the first time. Elise stared at the message pulse, quickening. She checked the metadata, routed through an anonymized relay. No identifying IP. Nothing she could trace. The tone wasn't angry, it was weary, cautious. And that's what disturbed her most. She leaned back in her seat, running a hand through her hair. Her instincts had been sharp before, but now they were a blade. This was bigger than a fake pregnancy. It was a pattern, a cycle. She opened a new tab and typed in Madison Quinn again, this time pairing it with names she remembered from their college years, people they'd both known. Sorority sisters, study groups, one ex-boyfriend who'd left town after graduation without a word. A few social media profiles popped up. She clicked through one, Samantha Hayes' former roommate. Private account? Elise opened LinkedIn instead. Samantha worked in HR now. No mention of Madison on her public feed, though they'd once been inseparable. Another ping hit her inbox. Another anonymous message. She's done this before. You were just too close to see it. Elise's chest tightened. The messages weren't threatening. They were pleading, warning her. She reopened her MQ timeline and started digging into older mentions. Yearbooks, college paper archives. One article from junior year described Madison as a campus advocate for women's health. The photo attached was grainy, but Elise recognized the posture, the composed smile, the way Madison clasped her hands like a politician. And then buried in the comment section, a single username, Deadlight48. Ask her what happened in spring semester. Ask her why she disappeared for 3 weeks and came back acting like nothing happened. Elise copied the comment and pasted it into her working file. Her fingers were cold now, but she didn't notice. She was chasing something she couldn't yet name. She returned to her inbox and drafted a quick response to the anonymous sender. Who are you? What did she do before? Help me understand. She hesitated, then hit send. The reply came less than a minute later. Read between the silences, start with February 2016, then check the donors who came after. No name, no sign-off, just more breadcrumbs. February 2016. The timeline matched Madison's disappearance. Elise opened a news aggregator tool she'd used on human trafficking cases. She filtered the search by region: Colorado, Denver, Boulder. Female victims, sealed police records, anonymous reports. And there it was. Unidentified woman hospitalized after alleged sexual assault case not pursued due to lack of formal complaint. Victim uncooperative with police, no official statement recorded. The article was barely 2 paragraphs tucked into the crime blotter of a local paper. No names, no follow-up. But the date was February 18, 2016. The hospital listed St. Mary's in Boulder. Elise leaned forward. She opened her photos from Madison's memory table, zoomed in on a pamphlet. St. Mary's. The branding matched, the logo, the fonts, the same clinic that Madison had quietly featured in her events as a partner. This wasn't coincidence. Elise opened her notepad again. 2016, potential trauma. No formal report, disappearance. 2017, foundation resurfaces with new tone. Personal stories used to attract donor empathy. Donor list, mostly older couples. Widows, names connected to children lost to violence. Anonymous tipper suggests pattern. Deception tied to emotional manipulation. She stopped writing. This wasn't just a lie to get donations. This was a constructed identity. A woman using pain not her own but the projected version of it to create trust, to build influence, to shape policy. But why now? Why a fake pregnancy? Why create a baby that didn't exist? Elise closed her laptop, heart pounding. She didn't have the full picture yet, but the frame was starting to take shape. And whatever Madison Quinn was hiding, whatever had broken in 2016 was no longer buried. It was surfacing. And it was coming for all of them. The following morning, the mountains were still dusted with pale light when Elise pulled back up to the estate. The celebration was long over. The balloon arch had wilted in the night, sagging with the weight of dew. Pink streamers clung to the wrought iron gate like forgotten whispers, the party's facade already beginning to rot at the edges. She parked 3 houses down out of sight from the main drive and walked the rest of the way with a canvas bag slung casually over one shoulder. She had rehearsed the excuse in her mind, left my notebook. Madison would kill me if I lost it. Can I just pop in and grab it real quick? But there was no one to convince. The housekeeper's car was absent, and from what she could see through the front window, the estate was quiet. Too quiet. The front door, surprisingly, wasn't locked. She turned the handle gently and slipped inside. The scent of roses and warm vanilla from yesterday's candles still hung faintly in the air, clinging to the silence like perfume on an empty body. She moved quickly, sticking to the edges of the hallway, her feet memorizing the soft creaks in the floorboards. She knew the layout well, had been here dozens of times back when things felt normal, when Madison was just her driven, eccentric friend who worked too much and trusted too little. Before the stages and the scripts. Before all of this, she bypassed the main living room and walked directly to the hallway off the kitchen, the one that led to Madison's private quarters. At the end of the corridor was a double door she recognized as the entrance to the master suite. She paused. No sound, no movement. She slipped inside. The room was pristine, the kind of curated perfection only someone obsessed with control could maintain. Not a hairbrush out of place, not a coffee cup left on a nightstand. The bed was made with hospital corner precision, the pillows stacked in threes. Elise's gaze went immediately to the walk-in closet. She opened it. Rows of pastel maternity dresses hung in color-coordinated sequins, blush cream lavender. All pristine. She ran her fingers along the tags, still attached. None of the garments had been worn. To the right, stacked on custom shelving, were boxes labeled Baby Essentials. She pulled one down carefully and opened the lid. Inside, unopened onesies, booties, receiving blankets. Tags still on, prices intact, a plush lamb rattle still in its plastic casing, all clean, all unused. She checked the next box. A baby monitor, still sealed. The next? Fake pregnancy bellies. She stared. There were 3 of them, each slightly larger than the last, made of silicone, skin-toned, anatomically detailed, and frighteningly lifelike. The kind used in film productions. Elise reached in heart-thudding and lifted one. It had weight. The illusion was perfect. She placed it back gently, carefully closing the box like it might detonate. Then she noticed the bag tucked beneath the shelf, a black zippered pouch with nothing but a small triangle logo on the side. She unzipped it and found a small camera no larger than a button, along with a pack of batteries and an SD card. Surveillance grade. Why would Madison need something like that? Elise stood slowly, her brain moving faster than her breath. The performance wasn't just for the public. There was something else, something Madison was preparing for. And then she heard it. A voice, muted but sharp, coming from the bathroom. Elise froze. The sound was coming through the closed door, not someone inside, but from a call on speakerphone. She backed up towards the entryway, half hidden by the doorframe. Madison's voice was crisp, professional, clipped. No, I told you, once the trigger is pulled, there's no walking it back. The media will smell blood. A pause. I'm not bluffing. He either settles quietly or we move forward. The moment the Graves transfer clears, we go. Another pause. No, I've already prepped Elise. She suspects, but she doesn't know what she's sitting on. She'll figure it out, and when she does, it'll be too late for him to spin it. Elise's chest tightened. I don't care what the lawyers say. He put his hands on me. He put me in that room. I've played the silent survivor long enough. This time I'm rewriting the story. The call ended with a sharp beep. Silence returned. Elise stood frozen, adrenaline thick in her veins. 100 questions swirled at once. Trigger Graves' transfer lawsuit. Who was he? Was this about the man from 7 years ago? Was this about revenge or something else entirely? She eased back down the hallway, pulse hammering, breath short. She didn't wait to look again. She needed out. Fast. The moment she stepped back into the front foyer, she paused. One camera, small, discreet, mounted above the front door, tilted slightly in her direction. Had it always been pointed that way? She didn't wait to find out. Elise slipped out the door and back into the chill of the morning. The sky above was clear, but inside her a storm had begun to gather. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked her car, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled away from the curb without looking back. She knew now. Madison wasn't just hiding something. She was preparing for war. Under the gray wash of a cold afternoon sky, Elise parked across from St. Mary's Medical Center and stared up at the building that had once been a place of quiet, healing white stone facade. Tall pine trees lining the driveway, a manicured lawn that made everything seem too calm, too untouched. 7 years had passed since the night Madison disappeared from the public eye. This was the place she'd resurfaced from, changed silent, never explaining why. Now Elise was here to fill in that silence. She pulled the collar of her coat tighter and stepped into the building. The lobby smelled like antiseptic and faint lavender, the kind hospitals use to mask the sting of bleach and trauma. She approached the front desk, her expression practiced polite. I'm trying to confirm a visit here from 2016, she said. A friend, Madison Quinn. She wasn't listed publicly, but I believe she came in through emergency. The woman behind the desk blinked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I'm sorry, but patient records, especially from that far back, are confidential unless you're authorized. I understand, Elise said, but I'm not asking for details, just, was she here February of 2016? Anything. I'm trying to help her. The receptionist gave a professional smile, the kind that came right before a hard no. If you're concerned about your friend's safety, I suggest calling her physician. Elise nodded, thanked her, and walked away, pretending to head toward the elevators. But she didn't go far. She'd already done her research, knew that the person she needed to find didn't work up front. She made her way down a side hall toward the staff cafeteria. Years of reporting had taught her that the real stories in any institution, hospitals, courthouses, police departments, didn't come from the top. They came from break rooms, from underpaid staff and overworked nurses who still carried the weight of what they saw long after the files were sealed. Elise waited near the vending machines until she spotted her target, Delilah Chan, former intake nurse, now part-time night shift administrator. She was in her early 60s, steel gray bun navy scrubs, sensible shoes. Elise had called in a favor earlier that morning to confirm she still worked part-time on site. She approached with quiet precision. "Miss Chan." Delilah looked up wary. "Yes, my name's Elise Morgan. I'm a journalist." Delilah gave her a once-over, not interested. "I'm not writing a story," Elise said quickly. "At least not yet. I'm trying to understand something. About a night 7 years ago, February 18th. Delilah hesitated. That date meant something. Elise could see it. "There was a woman brought in," Elise continued. "Early 30s, no ID, no explanation. She left without pressing charges. I think her name was Madison Quinn." Delilah's expression darkened. "That night's not in any system." "I figured. She must have asked for that, or someone did it for her." The older woman looked around, then motioned Elise toward a bench by the window. She sat down heavily, eyes fixed on the distant snow-tipped mountains. "I remember her," she said, "though not by name. Pretty, smart, looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her dress was torn at the back. Her feet were bare, hands shaking." Elise didn't speak. She let the silence hold space for what came next. "She wouldn't let anyone touch her," Delilah said, "not even to clean the blood. Screamed when the doctor tried, not like a patient in pain, like a woman in a cage." Elise felt her throat tighten. "She came in alone," Delilah continued. "No police escort, no friends. I think she got dropped off at the back lot. Someone rang the ER line and then vanished. She wouldn't give us a name, just kept saying no one can know, over and over." "And the police?" Elise asked softly. Delilah scoffed under her breath. "They came, eventually. 2 hours late. Took one look at her, one look at the chart, and said she wasn't cooperative. That if she didn't press charges, they couldn't proceed." "Did she tell you what happened?" "No," Delilah said, "but I've been doing this job for 30 years. I didn't need her to say it." Elise's voice was low now. "Did they run a kit?" Delilah's jaw clenched. "She wouldn't consent. We tried, but she was frantic, like the kit itself would destroy her. So we treated what we could. She signed herself out before sunrise, still bleeding, still barefoot." She looked at Elise then. "A week later, the administrator's office got a call from someone up high, real high. Told us to scrub the logs, no trace, not even billing." "Someone powerful?" Elise asked. Delilah gave her a look. "Is there any other kind?" A long silence passed between them. Elise reached slowly into her coat and pulled out a small notepad. "Did you see her again?" "No, but I heard her name a year later," Delilah said. "One of the nurses had the news on during shift change. There she was on TV, giving a speech about maternal health." I nearly dropped my tray. Elise stood, heart beating fast, adrenaline cold in her veins. "Thank you for telling me." Delilah didn't smile, she just looked tired. "Some people come here trying to disappear, others come here and get disappeared for them. Just be careful, Ms. Morgan. Not every ghost stays in the dark." Elise nodded, tucked her notebook away, and walked out of the cafeteria with the kind of purpose she hadn't felt since this began. She knew now beyond doubt that Madison's pain hadn't been manufactured. At least not all of it. The blood, the silence, the refusal to name names, those were real. But the twist came in what Madison did with it. She didn't bury it. She weaponized it. By the time Elise reached her car, the first flakes of snow were beginning to fall, soft white lies from a sky that never told the truth. She turned the key in the ignition and stared straight ahead. The hospital reflected faintly in her windshield. One man hurt Madison. Another helped cover it. Now she was using both to burn everything down. And Elise had just struck the match. The snow had stopped falling by the time Elise returned home, but her mind was still buried in the chill of what she'd learned. She walked straight past the kitchen, past the kettle she usually started without thinking, and into her small home office. She didn't even remove her coat. Her fingers moved on instinct, opening the folders on her encrypted drive, the ones she kept for long-forgotten leads and dead-end investigations. Not all of them were worthless. Some just needed the right context. And now, thanks to what she'd heard at the hospital, she finally had it. She opened a subfolder labeled Summerfest 2016. It had been an annual event back when she and Madison were still close, before the distance crept in like ivy through brick. Elise had attended that year as a guest, not a reporter. Back then, Madison had invited her to everything. But Elise remembered the day vividly. It had been hot, bright, packed with nonprofits and sponsors, music and speeches. She remembered Madison being there with a man older, polished, important. Madison hadn't introduced him, only said he's one of our biggest supporters, just be discreet. Elise hadn't questioned it at the time. She'd assumed the man was a politician or a donor, someone who made things happen behind the curtain. Now she opened the photos from that day and began combing through. Hundreds of shots, candid, blurred, faces half hidden by sunglasses, by sun hats, by movement. But she had always been meticulous, even in leisure. Always saving everything. Halfway through the batch, she froze. There he was. Dark blue blazer, white shirt open at the collar, sunglasses pushed to the top of his head. Standing beside Madison under a tent emblazoned with the new Grace Foundation logo. He wasn't looking at the camera, but Elise didn't need him to. Her blood went cold. She opened a new browser tab and typed his name. Raymond Harper, U.S. Senator, Colorado. She stared at his official photo, same jawline, same thick silver hair, same politician's smile like it had been pasted on his face since birth. In the photo, he looked disarming, distinguished. In Elise's image, he looked relaxed. Too relaxed. One arm rested behind Madison's chair, his fingers curled slightly possessively over the back. She remembered that tent now, the way Madison had kept glancing around, too alert, too aware. How she'd ended the conversation with Elise after barely 5 minutes, citing a sudden phone call. Elise opened another tab. Cross-referenced Harper's campaign finance disclosures. A few minutes later, she found it. A donation to New Grace Foundation, $125,000. Dated 3 years after Summerfest. Marked as a personal contribution. Another donation, this time from a PAC affiliated with his campaign. Smaller but regular, quarterly. Elise's heart beat faster as she cross-checked more data. Each time Madison's foundation had launched a new initiative, mobile clinics, maternal counseling hotlines, postpartum care programs, there had been a donation from Harper directly or indirectly. Not always large enough to raise eyebrows, but consistent. Uninterrupted. Why? Was it guilt? Blackmail? Or complicity? Elise opened the grant disclosure forms filed with the IRS. There, buried in the middle of a routine statement, was a name she hadn't expected: Harper Civic Wellness Trust. It was a shell foundation, one of many the senator used for community outreach. It had donated over $300,000 to various nonprofits in the past 5 years. But the largest single recipient, New Grace Foundation. Elise sat back in her chair, staring at the screen like it had just confessed to a crime. Why would a sitting senator funnel money into a nonprofit run by the woman who had disappeared after a sexual assault case that had never been investigated? She didn't want to jump to conclusions. But the timeline spoke for itself. Summerfest 2016. Hospital February 2016. Public reappearance of Madison November 2016. First donation from Harper Civic Wellness December 2016. And yet, he was still publicly associated with Madison's work. He'd attended galas, given speeches praising her bravery and vision. His staff had sent flowers to her events. No press had ever questioned the connection. No reporter had ever drawn the line. Until now. Elise opened her files again and dragged the Summerfest photo into a blank document. She added the hospital visit note, the audio paraphrase from Madison's phone call: "Once the trigger is pulled, there's no walking it back." What was the trigger? A press release, a lawsuit. Was Madison planning to expose him? Or was she trying to force a settlement in silence? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Digging into Harper, now careful. He doesn't like shadows. Elise stared at the screen, a chill crawling up her neck. She responded instantly. "Who are you?" No answer. She moved to her bookshelf and pulled down a leather-bound planner, the one she'd started keeping offline after her inbox was hacked 3 years ago. On a fresh page, she wrote, "Harper is the connection. He was with her before the hospital. He's been funding her since. No police report, ETSEC protection. Donations, EA, silence pregnancy, EX pressure narrative." She leaned back, closed her eyes, and played through everything like film reels running out of order. Madison in her pale maternity dress, standing before a crowd with tears that never reached her eyes. The pristine nursery untouched, the fake belly, the hidden surveillance cameras. And the voice on the phone, calm, calculating, controlled. "Once the Graves transfer clears, we go." She wasn't just faking a pregnancy for sympathy. She was building leverage. A weapon! The baby didn't have to be real for the fear to be. Elise opened a secure encrypted server and began backing up everything. The photo, the timeline, the donations, the hospital connection. She created a new folder. Labeled it Raymond Harper, Pattern of Influence. She didn't know yet whether Madison was hero or manipulator, victim or architect. But what she did know, undeniably, was this. Senator Raymond Harper was not just a donor. He was the ghost standing in the middle of Madison's story. And Elise had just dared to name him. The rain had started again by the time Elise pulled up outside Madison's estate, the kind that fell in sharp, slanted lines against the windshield, slicing through the quiet with a persistent rhythm. She didn't move right away. The car idled beneath the skeletal arch of pine trees that lined the driveway, her hands still resting on the steering wheel, knuckles pale from how tightly she'd gripped it the whole way up the mountain. She knew what she was walking into now. She had names, dates, donations, photos. What she didn't have, what she needed, was Madison's truth. Not the curated version that had charmed donors and won awards. The one buried beneath pink balloons and curated sob stories. She rang the doorbell once. Madison answered within seconds. Her eyes were shadowed, makeup-free hair pulled back in a loose braid that made her look younger. Or maybe just tired. She wore an oversized sweater and leggings, no jewelry, no trace of the Madison Quinn from yesterday's party. "Come in," she said simply. No pretense, no small talk. Elise followed her inside. The house was different now. The lavender candles had burned out and the sweet scent had been replaced by something muted like cedar and forgotten grief. A few stray balloons still floated against the ceiling. The gift table had been cleared. The illusion was coming down thread by thread. They sat opposite each other in the sitting room. Madison didn't pour tea, didn't offer anything. She just folded her legs beneath her, rested her elbows on her knees, and met Elise's gaze head on. So Madison said softly, "You know." Elise didn't flinch. "I do." Madison nodded. A silence stretched between them. Outside, the rain tapped harder against the windows like it wanted in. "You used to say I was the bravest person you knew," Madison said. "Funny how that's never really true when you need it to be." Elise leaned forward. "Tell me why." Madison gave a small, bitter smile. "Why what? Why fake a pregnancy? Why lie to hundreds of people who believed in me? Why take money under false pretenses?" She shook her head slowly. "You're asking the wrong questions." Elise said nothing. Madison sighed and looked toward the window. He was never going to admit it, Elise. Not when silence worked so well. Not when the system worked to his advantage every step of the way. "I tried disappearing, tried therapy, tried forgiving myself for what happened. None of it worked. None of it changed what he did." Elise's voice was low. "So you made yourself a headline." Madison turned back to her eyes steady. "No, I made myself a mirror. I wanted him to see what he tried to erase." There was no trembling in her voice, no tears, just a cold kind of clarity that came from years of compressing pain into purpose. "I didn't fake the pregnancy to get money," she said. "I did it to make him nervous, to remind him I still exist, that I could still talk." Elise stared at her. "Why now?" Madison blinked slowly. "Because I'm ready. Because for the first time I'm not ashamed of surviving." Elise shook her head. "You manipulated grieving families. You created an entire ecosystem of trust around a lie. You let people build a future around your fake child." Madison's jaw tightened. "And what do you think would have happened if I'd told the truth? That I'd been assaulted by a rising political star and pushed out of the ER without so much as a report, that I spent 3 days hiding in a motel with nothing but a toothbrush and blood-stained sheets?" She laughed bitterly. "People don't rally around shame, they rally around babies." A silence fell between them, long and sharp. Finally, Madison rose and walked to the cabinet near the fireplace. She opened a drawer slowly, deliberately, and returned with a single envelope. It was cream-colored, slightly bent at the corners. On the front, written in elegant cursive, "To the one I never met." She handed it to Elise. "I wrote this 3 years ago," she said, "when the flashbacks got so bad I couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time. When I was still seeing his face in the rearview mirror every time I backed out of a parking space." Elise opened the envelope. The letter inside was handwritten, 5 pages of tight, careful script. "My dearest daughter, you were never real, but you were the only thing that felt true in those months I was falling apart. I imagined your heartbeat when I couldn't hear my own. I pictured your fingers when I couldn't unclench my fists. I whispered lullabies into pillows I never cried on in front of anyone. You became the reason I got up. Not because you were coming, but because pretending you might gave me something to hold when I had nothing else. They say trauma is a wound you carry, but I carried you instead. I gave you a name in my dreams. I gave you a room in my heart. You were my way back to myself. And though you never lived, you saved my life. One day someone might read this and call it delusion, call it a lie, but I call it survival. You are the silence I turned into a voice, the ghost I made into a banner, and the lie that taught me how to finally tell the truth. Love always, your mother." Elise finished the letter, her throat tight. Madison's voice broke the silence. "There's no baby Elise, there never was, but there was pain, there was blood, there was trauma that no one wanted to name." She stepped back, standing straighter now, not defensive, just resolute. "I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm not sorry for why I did it." Elise set the letter down gently on the coffee table between them. The air between them shifted, no longer friend and friend, but witness and confessor. "I found the photos," Elise said, "from Summerfest. He was with you." Madison nodded. "He thought I'd forget. Thought I'd crumble like the others." "Raymond Harper is still donating to your foundation." "I know," Madison said. "Every cent he's ever given has been documented. If this goes public, the fallout won't just be mine." Elise's eyes narrowed. "So this is a strategy, a long play." Madison didn't blink. "It's justice, even if it has to wear a costume." Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside, the storm was just beginning. Elise stood slowly, heart heavy, with everything that still hadn't been said. "Whatever this becomes," she said, "you better be ready for all of it." Madison nodded. "I've been ready for 7 years." The room was quieter than Elise expected it to be. She'd imagined raised voices, maybe furniture being shoved back in righteous indignation, something loud, messy, the kind of fight that left emotional splinters everywhere. But instead, there was only the hum of the radiator and the low tick of the mantel clock between them. Madison stood near the window now, her arms folded loosely across the front of her oversized sweater, staring out as if the pine trees held answers. Elise remained seated on the couch, the letter still resting on the table in front of her like a relic from another world. one where truth was flexible and survival wore many disguises. You think I'm a monster? Madison said without turning around. I think you've crossed a line, Elise replied. The question is whether you meant to. Madison's head tilted. What if I told you I meant every step of it, that none of this was accidental? You're not helping your case. Madison finally turned to face her. Her expression was unreadable, not defiant, not remorseful, just tired. Like someone who'd spent years holding their breath underwater and wasn't sure what oxygen was supposed to taste like anymore. I didn't fake a pregnancy because I wanted attention, she said. I faked a pregnancy because the world doesn't give a damn about a woman who says she was raped by a politician, but it will cry for a grieving mother. Elise said nothing. The logic was brutal, precise, and undeniably real. I studied the donor patterns, Madison continued. Who gave, why they gave, and when they stopped. The most consistent support came from people who had lost children, gun violence, domestic abuse accidents caused by system failures. Their pain opened them up, made them empathetic, made them see. She walked slowly back toward the couch, sitting across from Elise now. They didn't want policy briefs, she said. They wanted humanity. And when you can't offer your own, you learn to speak through someone else's story. Elise stared at her. So you created one. I did. Madison didn't flinch. She wasn't trying to make Elise feel better. She wasn't even trying to absolve herself. What I needed wasn't money, she said. What I needed was a stage. One big enough to make someone like Harper sweat in his Italian suit. Elise's eyes narrowed. You're saying the whole thing, the gender reveal, the nursery, the belly was all just a strategy? Madison's smile was faint. A campaign. That's not justice. That's propaganda. Madison's voice lowered. And tell me, Elise, what do you think political campaigns are? The silence returned heavier this time. Elise leaned back, crossing her arms. You think this ends with a confession? With Harper begging for forgiveness? No, Madison said. I think it ends with people knowing. I think it ends with every donor who ever shook his hand realizing they funded silence. I think it ends with someone else somewhere seeing my story and not feeling so crazy for what happened to her. Elise exhaled slowly. And what if it backfires? What if they call you delusional, a manipulator? What if you destroy what little credibility you've built? Madison shrugged. I've already died once. The night I walked barefoot into that hospital and left with nothing. Not even my name, that was the death. Everything since then has just been aftershock. There was no bitterness in her tone, no melodrama, just fact. Elise shifted uncomfortably. And the donors. The ones who believed in this fake baby. I didn't take their money from me, Madison said. Every dollar was documented. Every gift went toward real programs, real mothers. We expanded prenatal clinics in 3 counties, launched a hotline, funded maternal mental health grants. Elise arched a brow. So the lie had a conscience. It had a purpose. Madison people are going to say this is psychological warfare, that you used grief like a currency. I did. The words hung in the air like smoke. I needed the world to understand that pain doesn't just disappear when the cameras turn off, Madison said. It festers, and if no one treats it, it grows teeth. She leaned forward now, her gaze sharp, direct. You asked me once why I never pressed charges, why I never said his name. And I'm telling you now, I didn't need the court to punish him. I needed the public to see him. Elise swallowed hard. So what's the next step? Madison reached beneath the table and pulled out a slim folder. She handed it across. Inside, a pre-drafted press release. Title: False Motherhood, True Pain, My Story and Why I Lied. Below, a detailed confession. Chronology of events, medical dates, donation trails, every name backed with proof. Even the fake sonogram was logged as a visual aid, not for personal gain, but for building credibility in front of the cameras. It was the tightest, cleanest scandal confession Elise had ever seen. You're going to release this, she asked. Yes. When? As soon as the Graves Foundation wire clears. Elise's eyes darted up. You're waiting for their donation. They promised $500,000 for the new mobile OBGYN unit, Madison said. We already started construction. If the story breaks too early, they'll pull out. But if I release this after, they'll be part of the impact whether they like it or not. Elise exhaled sharply. This is a calculated detonation. Madison smiled faintly. You once told me journalism wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about timing the truth. What do you call this, Elise? Elise looked down at the folder again. She didn't have a name for it. Not yet. Because part of her still wanted to believe Madison was the woman she'd once shared dorm rooms and long drives with. But another part of her knew deep in the place reporters keep their instincts that she was looking at someone transformed by trauma into something far more dangerous. Someone who had stopped waiting for justice and built her own reckoning instead. Finally, Elise closed the folder and looked Madison in the eye. I don't know whether to publish this or destroy it. I'm not asking you to do either, Madison replied. I'm just showing you who I really am. Elise stood. The room felt smaller now, charged with something volatile. But Madison didn't rise to follow her. She just watched quiet as Elise walked to the door. And just before Elise stepped outside, Madison's voice came again, soft but unshaken. You wanted the truth, Elise, and now you have it. Do with it what you will. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside Elise's mind, the storm had only just begun. It started with the silence, not the kind that's peaceful, not the kind that soothes. This silence hummed in Elise's ears like something just outside of hearing, like a dog whistle of dread. Her phone had gone quiet. Too quiet. After weeks of incoming texts, emails, encrypted tips from anonymous sources, now nothing. For 2 days straight, her inbox was a desert, not even spam. She sat in her apartment late that night, windows shut, laptop open. She refreshed her mail again. Still nothing. Not even her scheduled alerts from the data scraper she used to monitor campaign donations. It was as if the world had stopped whispering. She picked up her phone, no bars. Odd. Her building had always had good signal, especially near the window. She stepped toward the glass. Nothing. She powered the phone off, then on again. Still dead. That was the first moment she felt it, not paranoia, not suspicion. Something colder, more precise. Surveillance. The second came 12 hours later in broad daylight on a street she'd walked 1,000 times. Elise had just left the independent print shop with physical copies of Madison's timeline, an old habit she'd developed after losing files in a cyber attack years ago. She carried the folder close to her chest as she turned onto Halverson Street. She noticed them immediately. 3 men, one leaning against a lamppost, one pretending to check a parking meter, one seated on a nearby bench reading a newspaper in that way no one does anymore. They didn't speak, didn't approach, but they watched. They watched her like they were memorizing her. She kept walking faster now, her pulse in her throat. The folder in her hands suddenly felt radioactive. She didn't run, couldn't. Running meant acknowledging the threat. Instead, she crossed the street, ducked into a deli she'd never entered before, walked straight to the back, and exited through the kitchen. The staff didn't even blink. Once outside, she took a circuitous route through the alley behind the adjacent block. Only then did she call her editor. But her phone was still dead. When she got home that night, the door was unlocked. She froze. The deadbolt had been set when she left. She was certain of it. Elise pushed the door open with 2 fingers slowly. Every instinct in her told her to run, but instinct wasn't useful anymore. She needed to know. The apartment looked untouched. The lights were still off, nothing broken, no mess. But as she stepped inside, the air felt moved. She walked into her office first. Laptop gone. Not stolen, removed. There were no signs of struggle, no toppled books, no cords yanked in a hurry. The charger had been wrapped neatly and placed beside a ceramic pen holder. Everything else, printer, scanner, even the encrypted USB drive, untouched. Just the laptop. Her spine prickled. She checked the rest of the apartment. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed. Until she opened the drawer of her desk. There, folded carefully in the center, was a piece of notepad paper. The kind her old newsroom used for quick scribbles, generic beige, anonymous. In black ink, 5 words. Louis Lai Hoak Bien Mat. No signature, no flourish. She read it 3 times. She knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't a message. It was a warning. She called her editor from a burner phone she kept in her emergency bag. They spoke in code standard protocol for deep investigations. They came in without breaking anything, Elise said. They knew what to take. Her editor's voice dropped, and they left a message. Yes. Are you out? Elise hesitated. Out. There was no out. Not anymore. They know I have Harper in the photos. They know I have a timeline, but they don't know what Madison gave me. Are you sure? No? Her editor paused. Change safe houses. Tonight. I'll activate contingency backups. Elise hung up. She packed quickly. Clothes, hard copies, flash drives, disposable phone, gun. Yes, a gun. She wasn't naive. By midnight, she was on the other side of town in a studio sublet rented under a fake name. She wiped the door handle with a cloth before locking it behind her, taped over the webcam on her backup laptop, and switched on her offline recorder. Then she sat down and started narrating everything that had happened. Every step, every threat, every face she remembered from that street. It wasn't for publication, not yet. It was insurance. Somewhere in the middle of her retelling, her voice cracked, not from fear, but from fury. She'd spent her career exposing corruption. She'd survived lawsuits, slander, and burnout. But this was different. This was targeted, and that meant she was getting close. She opened a secure channel and left a coded message for a contact in D.C., an old friend who'd once worked in opposition research for a congressional campaign. If Harper had a history of intimidation, that's where it would live, buried beneath NDAs and shredded affidavits. Her contact responded within 30 minutes. You just poked a man who owns the stick. He's done this before, but never this loud. Elise asked the only question that mattered. Did it work? The reply came instantly. Always. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed, not this time. The next morning, she went to retrieve a second laptop she'd stashed in her old college locker at the university's journalism department, a trick she learned from an investigative reporter in Serbia. But it was gone. Locker untouched, no forced entry, just empty. Her locker had a keypad lock. Only 3 people had the code, and Elise hadn't shared it in years. She stood there for a long time, then walked out of the building past the portraits of award-winning journalists on the walls, people who had told hard stories and paid prices that couldn't be cashed in awards. She called Madison. The line rang twice before picking up. "I assume you're calling because they found you," Madison said, voice low. "They didn't find me, they warned me. I told you this wasn't a game. They took my laptop, left a message." Madison was quiet for a beat. "Are you out?" Elise almost laughed. "Funny, that's what my editor asked." And, "I'm still in." Another silence. Then Madison said, "Then you'd better read the second envelope." Elise blinked. "What second envelope?" "The one I slipped into your folder." "You didn't see it." She hadn't. She opened her bag, pulled out the manila folder. There it was, tucked inside the back pocket, nearly invisible unless you bent the file open. She pulled it out and opened it. Inside, a list of names, addresses, dates, a pattern of silent settlements issued from Harper's network of Shell Trust payments to women who never spoke again. Some were marked with symbols. Elise recognized the code instantly. One had a red X. "Is this?" "She was found dead 6 years ago," Madison said. "Suicide. No note. But she was pregnant. And she'd just left his campaign." Elise didn't respond. She couldn't. Because now it wasn't just about Madison. It never was. Harper hadn't just silenced her. He'd buried others. She looked at the list again. 6 names, 2 with red X's, and a 7th entry left blank. She didn't need to guess who that one was meant for. Her. It was just past 700 a.m. when Elise's mother called. Her ringtone, custom set for family, sliced through the stillness of the safe house like a blade. Elise hadn't heard it in weeks. She'd been keeping her distance, keeping them safe. At least she thought she had. She answered on the second ring. "Mom?" The voice on the other end was unsteady. Her mother rarely called her Elise. She preferred Ellie, a nickname only used in moments of affection or panic. This time it was both. "I got something," her mother said, voice tight. "It was in the mailbox. No return address." Elise stood up. "What do you mean?" "I didn't open it. I didn't want to touch it too much. It just had your name on the front, but it was sent here." Elise's heart thudded. "Can you describe it?" "White envelope, thick, like a wedding invitation, but heavier." Heavier. She already knew. "Don't touch it again," she said. "Put it in a plastic bag and put that bag in the freezer." "What, Elise? What the hell is going on?" "Just do it. I'll explain later." "Elise." Her mother's voice cracked. There was a note inside. I peeked. Elise swallowed. "What did it say?" Silence. "Elise," her mother whispered, "it said, 'One daughter gone is already too many.'" Time stopped. The phone slipped a little in Elise's hand, her fingers suddenly numb. Her breath caught shallow and fast. She hadn't heard her sister's name in years. Hadn't spoken it aloud since the funeral. It had been 8 years. 8 years since Marin died. Elise's hands trembled as she sank onto the edge of the bed. "Mom," she said, voice hollow, "is there anyone outside, anyone you don't recognize?" "No," her mother said, "but I haven't left the house yet. I locked all the doors, closed the blinds." "Good." "Elise, please. What's happening?" Elise closed her eyes. She thought she was ready for the retaliation. She wasn't ready for this. Not for them to be dragged into it. Not for Marin to be used as a weapon. She didn't leave the apartment for the rest of the day. Instead, she sat in front of the second burner phone, staring at the list Madison had given her. 6 names. 2 dead. She stared at the 7th. Blank. Now she understood. The blank space wasn't just a threat. It was an invitation. The silence she had once mistaken for safety was actually a pause, a breath drawn before a strike. And now that breath had turned into a message carved in memory. "One daughter gone is already too many." She curled her fingers into fists. Marin had been just 19. Quiet, brilliant, delicate in the way of people who see too much and say too little. She had trusted the system, trusted that the truth would be enough, that the boy from her college, charming, well-connected, the son of a judge, would face consequences. But he never did. There were no charges, no hearing, no apology. Just a school-issued no-contact agreement and whispered warnings from advisors to let it go for the sake of her academic record. Marin had tried. God, she'd tried. But each time Elise saw her in those final months, her sister seemed thinner. Like the weight of justice unserved was something her bones could no longer carry. She died in spring. The note she left behind wasn't long. Just 3 lines. "I screamed and no one listened. So now I'm silent forever. I hope someday someone makes them hear." Elise had carried those lines inside her ever since. Every article she wrote, every investigation she chased, every lie she refused to let rest. And now someone had brought that pain back to her doorstep. Not just metaphorically, literally. They knew about Marin. They were willing to use her memory like a tool, a blade. And it was working. It had carved open something Elise thought had long since scarred. She stood up and walked to the bathroom, looked in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. Dark circles, pale skin, lips dry from speaking truths into a world that wasn't listening. And still something burned in her eyes. Resolve. She splashed water on her face, wiped it clean, And then she picked up the burner phone again. The call was short. To a woman she'd worked with once back when they were both embedded in Eastern Europe chasing corruption through the ash of collapsed regimes. Now she worked in data security. Ellie, the voice said, I told you to call me only if it was worth my whole firewall. It's worth your firewall, Elise said. I'm listening. I need to know if anyone's monitoring the Quinn Foundation's cloud storage. You think they've been compromised? No, I think I have. There was a pause. Elise, the voice said, have they made it personal? Elise didn't answer. You're still standing, the woman continued. That means you still have a choice. I don't, Elise whispered. They used my sister's death to scare me. Another silence. Then the voice on the other end dropped. Then this isn't journalism anymore. I know. It's war. Elise pulled the letter from Marin's funeral out of her private folder. She hadn't read it in years. It was a copy of the speech she gave to 27 mourners under a gray sky back when she still believed in the power of words. This time she read it not as a sister, but as a woman about to enter something far more dangerous than mourning. It ended with a line she'd almost forgotten. I won't let the silence win, not while I still have a voice. She folded it, placed it in the inner pocket of her coat. Then she wrote a new one, not for publication, for protection. A full dossier, Harper's donations, the timeline Madison provided, the settlements, the missing laptop, the letter, the blank seventh name. She encrypted it and uploaded it to 3 secure drives in different parts of the world. Then she scheduled a timed release. If she went offline for more than 72 hours, it would go public. And if anything happened to her mother, the thought cut too deep. So she wrote that down too. By nightfall, Elise knew what had changed. She was no longer trying to expose a man. She was trying to dismantle a machine. And for the first time in her career, she didn't feel like a reporter. She felt like a soldier. A voice for all the women whose pain had been turned into footnotes. A shield for her mother. A reckoning for her sister. And a storm Harper would never see coming. They met in silence. No hugs, no greetings, just the quiet weight of shared danger in the air. It was after midnight when Madison arrived at the remote cabin Elise had secured in the hills outside Denver. She wore a plain coat, no makeup, hair pulled back tight, not the radiant director of a foundation, but the version of herself that had survived being erased. Elise had the fire going. She offered no pleasantries, just a nod toward the USB drive on the table. I uploaded the names, the payments, the hospital record, all on mirror servers encrypted, air-gapped. Madison sat across from her and reached into her bag. She placed a small voice recorder beside the drive. Elise, she said calmly, you were right not to trust me fully. Elise narrowed her eyes. I didn't come clean, Madison continued. Not about everything. Elise's jaw tightened. Harper's team didn't just send money. They sent someone to watch me. A liaison, they called him. But he's really an enforcer. A handler. You mean a fixer? Yes, Madison said, but he slipped once, drunk, said something I never forgot. She pressed play on the recorder. The voice that came through was male, confident, arrogant. You're lucky he didn't finish what he started. Some women would have begged for the hush money. Elise clenched her fist. Madison looked straight at her. That was 6 months ago. I've been recording him ever since. The next phase wasn't impulsive. It was war planned like chess, cold, methodical, and always 3 moves ahead. They knew that direct confrontation would fail. Harper was too protected, too experienced. But his aides, his advisors, interns, contractors, those were the cracks, the places where real secrets leaked. And so they sent in someone who could get close without raising suspicion. Her name was Rowan, former comms specialist turned whistleblower. She'd lost her job 2 years ago after exposing campaign finance violations in another senator's office. Elise had covered her story. Madison had funded her recovery. Now she was returning the favor. Rowan went undercover as a legislative communications consultant Harper's office was hiring, and her resume made her a perfect fit. No red flags, nothing overtly threatening. Just another ambitious woman in a suit. Within days, she was assigned to shadow Evan Doyle Harper's senior policy advisor and personal strategist. He was young, slick, a man who believed himself untouchable because he'd survived everything by riding the coattails of men like Harper. Rowan recorded every interaction, every corridor whisper, every coffee-fueled planning meeting, every late-night debrief in the senator's private quarters. And one night after 3 bourbons too many at an off-the-record event, Doyle said the one thing they needed most, the line that would crack it all open. Look, I told Harper not to panic. There's no real proof, no kid, no hospital trail. I said, as long as she can't show real medical records, she's just a headline with a fake belly. He laughed. Hell, she could have stuffed it with throw pillows for all I care. Without a body, she's nobody. The audio was clear, crisp, time-stamped, identifiable. Elise listened to it in her cabin with headphones, eyes closed, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from fury. Madison said nothing. She didn't need to. It was the most disgusting sentence they had ever caught on tape. But it was gold. Now came the question of how to use it. Leak it too early, and it would be dismissed as selective editing or revenge porn in the political arena. Wait too long, and Harper could preempt it, deny redirect, or disappear behind PR fog. So Elise made a decision. She reached out to an old mentor, someone with reach. His name was Julian Creed, a Pulitzer-winning anchor who now ran an independent investigative news platform with millions of subscribers. She didn't send him everything, just a teaser. The voice, the quote, and a time-stamped transcript with a brief message. If I die or vanish, this is only the beginning. You'll find the rest in the encrypted drop. Creed responded within the hour. Let's meet. One condition, you bring the full truth. I don't do half measures. She met him at a cemetery. Neutral ground, no surveillance, no ears, just the wind. Elise handed him the entire drive. He said nothing, just took it, nodded once. I won't release anything he said unless I know what she wants. She wants justice, Elise said. Creed raised an eyebrow, or revenge. Elise looked away. Sometimes she whispered, they're the same. Meanwhile, Harper's inner circle began to feel the shift. Emails were being flagged. Aides were nervous. One assistant went silent. The fixer Madison had once recorded suddenly vanished from the foundation's payroll. Harper grew more vocal in the press, scheduling last-minute charity events, appearing on news segments, pushing a fatherhood initiative to restore public trust. But behind the curtain, he was spiraling. Because Elise had already sent the audio to 6 other journalists under embargo. Because Rowan had extracted metadata from Harper's campaign drive's files that linked him to other questionable settlements. Because the phrase a fake belly had already become a whisper in the Capitol, repeated in closed-door meetings with discomfort. And then came the final straw. Creed released a teaser trailer on his platform. A simple haunting clip. Dark screen, white text. Then Doyle's voice. Without a body, she's nobody. Fade to black. Caption. An unborn child, a silenced woman, a powerful man. This is the story they paid to bury. Coming soon. It went viral in 6 hours. Hashtag #FakeBellyRealSilence. Comment sections exploded. Madison Quinn's name trended nationwide. Elise's past stories were reshared, dissected. And Harper's team, they froze. No press release. No denial. Just silence. Because now the world had questions. And silence no longer worked as a defense. That night, Elise and Madison sat in the dark watching the backlash unfold. The video had reached 2 million views. Rowan sent a single text, he fired me, I still have my copy. Madison looked over. You realize what this means, right? Yes, Elise said, it means we go all in. Madison's hand trembled slightly as she opened her laptop. She pulled up the lawsuit template she drafted but never filed. She clicked print. It whirred slowly page by page until the final one dropped into the tray. She signed it, then turned to Elise. This time she said, voice steal, the world will listen. The first article went live at 7:58 a.m. on a Monday. Not in print, not on cable, but on every screen that mattered. Elise had titled it simply, The Belly and the Silence, a Political Machine versus One Woman's Truth. It opened not with accusation, but with intimacy. A photo Madison alone in her nursery surrounded by folded onesies, a blank sonogram frame on the wall behind her. The caption read, there is no baby, but there is a crime. Then came the story. Measured, unapologetic, brutally honest. Elise laid it bare in phases, no dramatization, no flowery transitions. Just facts, audio images, and dates. She walked readers through the 7-year-old hospital record, the non-report of assault, the sudden appearance of hush funds, the suspicious donations, the fake pregnancy constructed, not to deceive the public, but to compel it to force attention on a woman whose pain had been ignored for far too long. She embedded the leaked quote from Harper's advisor, without a body, she's nobody, right next to a scan of Harper's PAC funneling donations to New Grace. She posted redacted emails, the timeline of payments, even a video clip of the nursery walkthrough contrasted with the shot of the prosthetic belly she had seen in Madison's closet. And finally, she included Madison's voice trembling but resolute, saying, I needed them to believe I was a mother because no one believed I was ever a victim. The article ended with one line. This isn't about motherhood. It's about being heard before you're buried by silence. Within 45 minutes, the server hosting her platform slowed under the weight of national traffic. By 9:30 a.m., the hashtag #JusticeForMadison was trending across all major platforms. By noon, Elise had given 6 interviews. By 2:00 p.m., the story had reached international press. And by nightfall, the nation demanded a response. Senator Raymond Harper's team scrambled. He had been in Colorado that morning preparing for a speaking engagement on rural family initiatives. It was supposed to be a highlight, something warm, humanizing. Instead, he arrived to a wall of flashing cameras, reporters pressing microphones against his chest, screaming, Senator, is it true you paid off an assault victim? Did you fund a cover-up? Do you deny the recording? He smiled barely. Not the confident grin of a man in control, but the tight, trembling smile of a man trying to read the script from a teleprompter that no longer exists. That afternoon, he announced a press conference to address the fabricated allegations. Elise watched it from the safe house, her laptop open, recorder running. She knew what he would do. The denial would be precise. The wording lawyer approved. But she also knew he couldn't put the fire out. Harper stepped onto the stage at exactly 4:00 p.m. EST, American flag behind him. Two women at his side, both senior staffers, both stone-faced. He began with a prepared statement. I am deeply disturbed by the false and defamatory allegations that have surfaced in the media this morning. Let me be clear, at no point have I engaged in covered up or condoned any behavior that disrespects the integrity of women or the trust of the American people. The cameras clicked. The room stayed still. He continued trying to steer the narrative, calling the investigation politically motivated, the audio recordings taken out of context, Madison Quinn's story, a tragic misunderstanding manipulated by activists and biased journalists. But the room wasn't having it. A reporter stood interrupting him mid-sentence. Senator, can you explain the email showing a direct wire transfer from your Civic Wellness Fund to the New Grace Foundation less than 30 days after the woman in question checked into a hospital for trauma care? Harper faltered for a second. That wire was labeled reputation mitigation, the reporter continued. Do you deny authorizing it? He stammered. Before he could answer, another hand shot up. Senator, did you authorize your aide to refer to Madison Quinn as, quote, just a fake belly? That comment taken wildly out of, then release the full audio, a voice shouted from the back. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Harper's lips pressed into a hard line. He was unraveling, and the nation could see it. By 6:30 p.m., public opinion was shifting like a tide. Not quietly, not gradually, but violently. Hashtags multiplied. Believe Madison, fake belly, real pain. Harper must resign. Women across the country posted their own stories of being silenced, dismissed, disbelieved. Some shared photos of their hospital bracelets, others screenshots of ignored police reports. One video went viral within minutes, a woman standing silently in front of her senator's office holding a sign that read, "No baby, no bruises, still real." Madison watched all of this from her office at New Grace. She hadn't spoken since the article dropped. Now, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky blood orange, she finally did. I thought they'd laugh, she whispered. I thought they'd say I was crazy. Elise turned to her. They tried. Madison nodded. But they didn't win. Harper's team went into emergency damage control. Within hours, they attempted to schedule a second press conference. It was canceled, then rescheduled, then postponed due to unforeseen circumstances. Within 48 hours, a new headline emerged. 3 senior aides resigned from Harper's office. Then another. Former staffer accuses Harper of routine manipulation and psychological intimidation. Then a third. Senate Ethics Committee receives formal complaint against Harper. Investigation pending. Elise's inbox exploded. Journalists, survivors, prosecutors, even ex-law enforcement officers who had once been told to stand down in a certain case involving a woman named Madison Quinn. Elise created a new database to track it all. By day 3, there were 200 submissions, each one a story, each one a reckoning. But there was one message that stood out. A name Elise didn't recognize at first, Detective Hallie Rhodes. The email subject line read, I know what happened at County Memorial in 2016. Elise opened it. It was short. I was ordered to shred the intake report. I didn't. I kept it. And I want it to count now. She attached the file. It was real. Not just a note, not just a billing code, but the full ER report. Madison Quinn, 22 years old, vaginal trauma consistent with sexual assault. Patient refused to identify perpetrator. Patient exhibited signs of panic dissociation. Police report initiated, case frozen at level 1 review due to outside intervention. Signed Rhodes H., lead intake investigator. Elise's breath caught. She forwarded the file to Creed, then to every legal team that had reached out, and then finally to Madison. There were no words after that. Just a moment, Madison sat with the report in her hands. Tears fell slow and quiet, but when she looked up, there was something else in her face now. Not rage, not grief, but power. 'Cause for the first time in 7 years, someone had believed her, and the silence was no longer winning. The storm didn't end with applause. It shifted. It re-aimed. And this time the arrows pointed not at Raymond Harper, but at Madison Quinn. It started small, just a few cautious comments beneath Elise's article. I feel for her, but wasn't that whole pregnancy fake? Hard to trust someone who stages a nursery like a crime scene. I donated in good faith. Where did that money really go? Then a national morning talk show aired a panel discussion on emotional fraud in the digital age. One guest, a well-known trauma expert, raised a question that became a wildfire. When pain is real but the presentation is not, does the end justify the manipulation? By midweek, 3 major donors to the New Grace Foundation had issued public statements condemning Madison's actions. One of them, a tech entrepreneur who had lost a daughter to a stillbirth, accused Madison of weaponizing grief for narrative gain. That afternoon, the district attorney's office released a brief press notice. We are opening a preliminary inquiry into potential misuse of funds and will assess any irregularities tied to nonprofit reporting standards. No charges, not yet. But the word fraud hung in the air like the scent of blood in the water. Elise stared at her phone screen in disbelief as headlines changed, from hero to hoax. Pregnancy deception sparks donor backlash. Nonprofit under fire. Was Madison Quinn's story too good to be true? She slammed her laptop shut. Bastard, she muttered. Then she drove. Madison was at the New Grace office alone, lights dimmed. She sat at her desk surrounded by paperwork and silent phones. When Elise entered, Madison didn't flinch. She just turned toward her, eyes heavy, jaw tight. They're calling me a scam artist, she said flatly. They're scared, Elise replied. You shook their world. No, Madison said. They're angry. They gave me money. They feel duped. And Harper's team is feeding it, leaking internal reports, spinning it so I look like a manipulator who played the long game. Elise walked over and sat across from her. You didn't lie about the pain. Madison looked away. I didn't tell the truth either. There was a long silence. And then Elise asked, do you regret it? Madison laughed. Not loudly, just one breath of disbelief. If I had faked a suicide note instead of a pregnancy, they'd be calling me brave. If I had overdosed on live TV, maybe they'd have asked why I did it instead of how. She leaned forward, voice quieter. But I chose to perform survival, not victimhood. That's what makes them mad. Elise nodded slowly. Madison met her eyes. If I have to go down so that bastard finally faces what he did, then let them burn me. That night, Elise received an anonymous envelope at her apartment door. Inside, an audit notice from the Colorado Department of Financial Regulation, not addressed to Elise, but to New Grace. The date on the form, the morning after Madison's article went viral. Pre-filled, pre-signed, backdated. She called her contact at the nonprofit compliance board. They confirmed yes, someone had filed a whistleblower complaint alleging intentional emotional misrepresentation for financial solicitation. There was no name attached. But Elise knew exactly where it came from. She remembered Harper's quote, "Without a body, she's nobody." And now he was building the narrative she had feared since the beginning, that Madison was nobody. That the trauma, the pregnancy, the campaign, it was all just one woman playing puppet master for pity. They were using her honesty against her pain as performance, her healing as con artistry. Elise couldn't stop shaking. The next morning, 2 IRS agents showed up at the New Grace Foundation office with a formal request for internal documents, expenditures, donor lists, and public statements related to the past 2 years. Madison received them calmly. No protest, no panic, just quiet compliance. One agent, a young woman, paused before leaving. She turned back and looked Madison in the eye. I read the article, she said quietly. My sister never reported either. But she would have believed you. Madison nodded once. And then for the first time since the backlash began, her eyes filled with tears. Not from fear, but from being seen. Even now, even under suspicion. By week's end, late-night TV shows were cracking jokes. She faked a baby to catch a predator. Someone tell Netflix this woman needs a deal. Madison Quinn, part activist, part performance artist, part nonprofit, Houdini. Some audiences laughed. Others raged. But in Colorado, Elise worked nonstop, contacting every donor who had spoken out. Some hung up, some replied with legal threats. But a single mother from Kansas who had donated her last $50 during the pandemic said something that lit a new fire in Elise. If she lied, I don't care. She made me feel like I mattered. No one else did. The pressure reached boiling point the next Monday when the Colorado State Board for Charitable Organizations announced a formal review of the New Grace Foundation's operational practices. Madison was called in for a closed-door session. 3 hours. No Elise, no press. When she emerged, her hair was messy, her voice gone, but she walked straight to the press area gathered outside. No podium, no script. Just a small notebook. She read from it, voice trembling but audible. When I pretended to be pregnant, I didn't know what would happen. I only knew what had already happened, that I was assaulted, discarded, and told I didn't matter unless I had something to show for it. So I showed them something. Not to trick them, but to teach them. Because some stories are only heard when they fit the world's comfort. Mine didn't. So I remade it. She looked up, eyes blazing. If this is the price of exposure, then fine. Investigate me. Question me. But don't forget who you didn't investigate for 7 years. Don't forget who made me silence myself in the first place. Then she walked away. That clip alone was viewed 18 million times in 2 days. And though legal proceedings loomed, something else shifted in the public tone. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. Because even the skeptics couldn't deny it anymore. Madison Quinn had told the truth, just not in the language they were used to hearing it. And for that alone, she was already rewriting the rules. The small farmhouse sat at the edge of a soybean field just outside Wichita. No driveway, just gravel and grass worn down by years of boots and memories. Elise parked her rental on the side of the road. She hadn't come for an interview. She came because a name on a donor receipt wouldn't leave her alone. Margaret Halstead, $20 donation. No job title, no profile, just a handwritten note attached to her online form. In honor of Ashley, she would have believed Madison. Elise walked up the creaky front steps, knocked twice. A woman in her early 60s opened the door, silver hair pulled into a low knot, eyes clouded but alert. Yes. Ms. Halstead, Elise said gently. My name is Elise Marlowe. I'm the journalist who— I know who you are, Margaret said, then stepped back. Come in, I was just finishing tea. They sat in the sunroom, no AC, just the hum of a ceiling fan, and the slow breath of someone who'd lived through storms louder than this one. Margaret poured tea plain and hot. She was 17, Margaret said. Ashley, our only child. Never liked makeup. Loved drawing faces, though. I still have her sketchbooks. Want to see them? Elise nodded, overwhelmed. Margaret didn't bring them, just pointed to a shelf near the window, where a stack of leather-bound notebooks leaned against a photo of a girl with a crooked smile. She was assaulted at a community party. Everyone knew who did it. They called it a misunderstanding. She tried to go back to school, but her voice broke for the first time. She couldn't walk into a hallway without seeing people whisper. And one morning, she didn't come out of the bathtub. Elise swallowed hard. I'm so sorry. Margaret nodded. You know, when I saw Madison's video, the one where she says she wore a belly just to be heard, I didn't feel tricked. She paused. I felt seen, because someone finally did something so outrageous the world had to stop pretending it didn't hear. She reached across the table and touched Elise's wrist. I don't care if she used a fake sonogram. What she told us was real. Elise's eyes burned. Margaret looked her in the face. At least she fought. That's more than most of them do. Elise drove back in silence. No music, no calls. Just a sentence echoing in her mind, at least she fought. She remembered her sister Caroline, the pills, the notebook, the questions scrawled over and over in the margins of her journals. Why won't they believe me? It wasn't just Madison's story anymore. It never had been. Back in Denver, Elise opened her laptop and began typing. The second article took 14 hours. No sleep, no edits. It flowed like a confession, like a scream. She titled it, When the Living Must Wear Grief to Speak for the Dead. She opened with a montage stories collected in the aftermath of Madison's fallout. A woman who miscarried after an assault never reported it, but carried the ultrasound image in her wallet for 18 years. A girl who wore maternity clothes for a school project, only to have 3 classmates confide that they, too, had been abused but had never spoken. A mother who held a memorial for a child that had never been born because it was easier than explaining what had been taken from her. Elise then shifted to Madison. She didn't defend her, didn't justify. Instead, she reframed. What if the lie we judge so harshly wasn't a deception but a performance for a justice system that only recognizes certain kinds of pain? She detailed the accusations, the audits, the backlash, then posed the uncomfortable question. If Madison Quinn deserves prosecution for manipulation, what punishment do we assign to the system that made such manipulation necessary? The article didn't go viral instantly. It didn't need to. It simmered. It made people think, not just feel. And by the 3rd day, it was being printed out and passed around in dorm rooms, hospitals, women's shelters, and Capitol Hill elevators. Meanwhile, Madison remained under formal investigation. She had stopped speaking to press, stopped tweeting, but she hadn't stopped working. She met with her legal team, prepared every financial document, personally called every donor who would still answer the phone. Some were angry, some confused. But a surprising number said the same thing. I still stand with you. Late one night, Elise received a voicemail from someone she hadn't heard from since her sister's funeral. Detective Layton retired. I read the article, he said. You're right, I was part of the silence. I'm ready to talk if you want me to. Elise saved the message, then broke down crying. It was the first time she allowed herself to mourn her sister not as a tragedy, but as a voice that had finally echoed back. 1 week later, the state prosecutor held a closed briefing. Elise wasn't allowed in, but she waited outside. 2 hours later, a clerk leaked the decision to local press. No formal charges will be filed against Madison Quinn at this time. Our review found insufficient evidence of criminal intent. However, the foundation will undergo restructuring and increased oversight. Elise rushed to New Grace. Madison sat at her desk reading the memo. You're free, Elise said breathlessly. Madison shook her head slowly. No, I'm visible. That's different. Then she smiled, small but real. Still, I'll take it. Outside protesters had gathered again. But this time, they weren't shouting against her. They held signs. Believe pain, not perfection. Justice for the unseen, Madison spoke. Listen better. And in the back, under a cherry blossom tree just beginning to bloom, stood Margaret Halstead, holding Ashley's sketchbook, tears in her eyes, hope in her chest. Elise and Madison walked out together. No fanfare, just truth, and the sound of silence beginning to break. The courtroom smelled of dust and air conditioning. It was day 32 of the closed federal ethics hearing into Senator Raymond Harper. And though the room was off limits to press, the world waited outside, refreshing live streams, checking social feeds, texting updates back and forth with breathless anticipation. Madison wasn't present, neither was Elise. But every seat in this gallery was filled with women and men who had followed the story from the beginning. Some carried notebooks, others carried court sketches. A few simply carried memories they had never dared speak aloud. At 10:43 a.m., the judge emerged, Black robe, no expression. A bailiff read the ruling aloud. In light of mounting evidence, the court recommends Senator Raymond Harper immediately step down from his office while the Department of Justice proceeds with a formal criminal investigation. The senator is also prohibited from contacting witnesses or using campaign funds for legal defense pending resolution. There was no cheering, just the sound of an entire room exhaling. And outside a press conference waiting like dry wood ready for fire, Elise watched the broadcast from a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. But she did close her eyes for a long, quiet moment and whispered finally. Then she pulled out her notebook. She still had work to do. That afternoon, the Office of Charitable Oversight released their long-anticipated report on the New Grace Foundation. It was 37 pages long. Detailed, meticulous, fair. It concluded that while Madison Quinn had utilized emotionally charged narratives in unconventional ways, there was no evidence of personal financial gain, embezzlement, or illegal solicitation. However, New Grace must undergo operational restructuring. The current board of directors is to be replaced. Madison Quinn is to step down from executive leadership and will be restricted from serving as a financial officer for any nonprofit for a period of 3 years. Elise called Madison the moment she read the final sentence. "I'm so sorry," she said. Madison laughed softly. "For what accountability? No, I know you gave everything to that place." "I gave them what they needed," Madison replied. "Now I get to give others what they need." 2 weeks later, Madison stood in the basement of a converted crisis center on the edge of downtown. No banners, no cameras. Just mismatched chairs, dim lighting, and a circle of women, some young, some older, who sat in silence, clutching tissues or sipping water from trembling hands. A volunteer introduced Madison. "Some of you may recognize her. Others may not. She's not here as a symbol today. She's here as someone who understands." Then the floor was hers. She took a breath. "My name is Madison Quinn," she said, "and for a long time I thought no one would ever believe me. So I did something drastic, and people noticed." She scanned the faces in front of her. "Now I want to use that attention for something quieter, something slower, something real." She held up a journal empty. No cameras, no reporters, no followers, just us and our truths. And with that, she sat down and passed the journal to the woman on her right. Meanwhile, Elise published her final article in the trilogy. The headline read, "Silence was the crime, speaking was the sentence." In it, she described not just Madison's journey, but her own. She revealed Caroline's name for the first time, shared the pages of her sister's final journal, the questions, the pleas, the ache. And in the last paragraph she wrote, "Justice is not always about conviction. Sometimes it's about the courage to speak after years of being told not to. Sometimes it's about surviving when you were never supposed to. And sometimes it's about learning how to live a quieter truth after the noise fades." Raymond Harper issued a video statement 2 days after resigning. He didn't apologize. He spoke of personal struggles, media distortion, and a commitment to clearing his name. But his eyes looked hollow. His voice was rehearsed. And the comments beneath the video were not kind. The DOJ investigation continued, slow grinding but unrelenting. No plea deals, no immunity, just the truth bit by bit. Elise visited the old New Grace building the following week. It was being renovated into a community-led shelter. One of the new board members gave her a tour. They pointed to a hallway lined with murals, each one painted by survivors. No names, just hands and stories. At the end of the hall, a quote was painted across the wall. "Sometimes we have to become the symbol they can't ignore, just long enough to become ourselves again." It wasn't attributed, but everyone knew who said it. Madison didn't give interviews anymore. She turned down every documentary offer, every podcast request, every profile. When asked why, she said, "The story isn't mine now, it's ours, and ours don't belong to headlines." Instead, she wrote letters to victims, to donors, to children who would never be born but whose names were whispered in empty rooms anyway. Some of those letters were never sent. Some were read aloud in trauma groups. Others were burned as part of healing rituals. But every word carried one message: you matter. You were never invisible. On the first anniversary of the article's publication, Elise organized a panel discussion on journalistic ethics, emotional truth, and the power of narrative. She invited survivors, therapists, legal experts, and one empty chair for those who couldn't attend. When asked what she'd do differently, Elise answered, "Nothing, except believe sooner." She received a standing ovation. But the most meaningful moment came after, when a teenage girl slipped a note into her coat pocket. "My name is Aria. I was scared to speak, but I read your article. Now I'm ready." Elise kept the note in her wallet, next to a faded photo of Caroline. By year's end, Madison had become a quiet figurehead in advocacy circles. Not a martyr, not a savior, just someone who had dared to scream into silence and survived the echo. She no longer needed a stage. She had something louder now: trust. One survivor at a time, the package arrived without fanfare. No courier, no signature required, just a brown padded envelope with Elise's name handwritten in soft blue ink, like something from a different era. Inside a bound manuscript. On the cover, no title, no author name, just a single sentence written in Madison's familiar hand. For the ones who were never allowed to speak. Elise didn't open it right away. She held it, felt the weight of it, not just the pages, but the truth that might lie within. The confessions, the raw edges, the pieces of a woman who'd burned down her own life just to get someone to look. That night, she brewed tea, turned off her phone, and opened the first page. It wasn't a memoir, not exactly. It was a letter. One long, continuous handwritten letter to someone unnamed but unmistakably plural. Each paragraph bled into the next. There were no chapters, no clever turns of phrase, just honesty, bruised and bleeding. Madison wrote of the day she stopped trusting her body. Of the night she ran barefoot out of the Harper estate, her dress torn, blood drying under her fingernails, too numb to cry. Of waking up in a hospital bed to a police officer offering her a pamphlet instead of justice. Of the clinic, the procedure, the shame that was handed to her like a receipt, then 7 years of silence. And finally of the plan. I didn't lie, she wrote, I performed, because the stage is the only place grief gets applause. She wrote of her regret not of the fake pregnancy, but of the women who needed her to be perfect and couldn't understand when she wasn't. She confessed the loneliness, the hate mail, the nights she reread Elise's articles just to remember why she started. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't ask to be understood. She simply said, I failed. But I failed trying to break a cycle that has broken women for generations. Elise sat frozen long after finishing the last line. She hadn't cried until now. But there it was. Not out of sadness, not out of guilt, but from a strange aching sense of gratitude. Someone had finally written it all down. Without agenda, without filter, just truth. 3 weeks later, Elise sent Madison an email. I'd be honored to write the foreword. And so she did. It was short, unpolished, brutal. Just one page. This is not a story about perfection. Madison Quinn wore a fake belly. She posed for photographs. She lit a match and watched her own legacy burn because no one listens to quiet grief. What you're holding isn't a book, it's a mirror. And sometimes the only way to make the world look is to break the glass. A fake hug, a fake pregnancy, a real pain. Read this not to judge, read this to feel. When the unsent letter was quietly released 6 months later through an independent imprint, it didn't top bestseller lists. But it didn't need to. It was passed between hands in waiting rooms, campus offices, women's shelters, grief groups. It was hidden in nightstands and carried in purses. And each time someone opened it, the first thing they saw was Elise's foreword. Each time they read the same final line, read this not to judge, read this to feel. And they did. The courtyard of the university was humming with late spring heat. Students gathered beneath half-bloomed oaks and rusted campus banners that fluttered in the breeze like tired applause. A makeshift podium stood on the stone steps of the Humanities building, no microphone, no press. Just a circle of folding chairs and about 50 young women, some clutching notebooks, others fiddling with their sleeves or the zippers of their jackets. Madison stood at the center, hands clasped before her. She wasn't dressed like an executive anymore. No tailored coat, no signature pearl earrings, just a soft gray sweater, faded jeans, and eyes that had weathered more storms than she'd ever speak aloud. She waited until the side conversation stopped. Then she began. I used to believe silence was safer, that if I didn't say it, it didn't happen, that if I smiled hard enough, the world wouldn't ask questions. She paused. But silence is a debt, and the longer you carry it, the more it costs. A ripple of stillness passed through the group. Phones weren't raised, no one recorded, not because they weren't allowed, but because they knew this wasn't something to be stored, it was something to be felt. Madison continued, I faked something once, not to deceive, but to survive. I thought I had to become someone tragic enough, dramatic enough, visible enough to make the world pay attention to what it didn't want to hear. A girl in the second row, no older than 19, clutched her sleeves tighter. I'm not here to justify it. I'm here to tell you that sometimes we do the wrong things for the right reasons. And if you're ever forced to choose between silence and a lie that saves someone else, don't let shame make that choice for you. Another pause. The truth is still yours, even if it's messy, even if it's late, even if it trembles when you speak it. A few girls nodded, one wept. Madison's voice lowered. No one prepares you for the price of honesty, not the legal system, not the media, not your own reflection. She looked up at them, eyes steady. But I'll tell you this, the moment you speak, you stop being invisible. At the edge of the courtyard behind a stone column worn smooth by decades of campus wind, Elise stood quietly. She didn't take notes, didn't raise her phone. She just watched, not as a journalist now, but as something else, as someone who had once chronicled a war and now guarded the peace that followed. She watched Madison finish her speech and step down, watched as students clustered around her, not with fanfare, but with something deeper: trust. Later that night, Elise returned home and found a copy of the unsent letter on her desk. She opened it almost absently, letting the pages fall to where she had written the foreword. Her eyes landed on the final line. Some stories must be written even if they're never sent. A quiet breath left her lips. She flipped to the back page, blank, and suddenly she picked up a pen and started writing.